and we're going to be talking about improving client retention. And I'm super excited to talk to Shama about that. I'm going to tell you more about her if you're not familiar with her. I know that we probably have a lot of Shama fans actually on the webinar here today. It really is mostly a live Q&A. If you are not familiar with SharpSpring or with the webinars that we do, we like to bring you a lot of content on agencies and some of the problems that agencies struggle with, and how agencies can help optimize their business for themselves and for their customers. And SharpSpring has really built our entire business around the needs of agencies. And we have a software platform that we call the Revenue Growth Platform. And it's really focused on providing specific benefits for agencies, helping you build higher value relationships, driving measurable results for your clients, and creating a recurring revenue stream. And the platform itself helps marketers really create relationships with their customers from the first touch through nurture, through sale, and then supporting them as well in their life cycle. So it really is a revenue growth platform dedicated to the holistic customer journey, if you will. So I am joined today by Shama Hyder, and again, super excited to have you on, Shama, and we'll bring you up in a second here. So Shama is the CEO of Zen Media, and she's a best-selling author. She was ranked as one of LinkedIn's top 10 voices in marketing for 4 years in a row, from 2016 to 2019. She was named one of the top 25 entrepreneurs under 25 by Businessweek in 2009, and Forbes top 30 under 30 in 2015. And as I mentioned, today's session will be focused on tips to help you improve client retention for your agency. We are going to be doing Q&A. We do want you to chat in your questions. So if you have them at any point, feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them, and I'll pose them over to Shama. And stick around at the end. I have sort of a special URL that I want to tell you about, so you can take part in more content from SharpSpring. And Shama, yeah, come on up.
Hey.
There you are.
Hi, Chip.
How are you?
I'm doing really well. Aside from a cold, I mentioned you backstage, I'm nursing, so I apologize for that in advance. But I am really excited to talk about this topic with you today.
Yeah, it's such a great topic. I mean, especially as we're sort of emerging from the pandemic to a certain extent, and
Yes.
agencies are finding themselves in a whole new space than they were maybe 15 months ago. And we've done some research in partnership with Carl Sakis, another person that we've worked with on a regular basis, and Carl's research shows that optimism is up for agencies, right now, which is great.
As it should be.
Yeah, very cool. So very excited to have you on here. And Shama, I think it maybe makes sense to just start with you talking more about your own agency.
Yeah.
And so just tell the audience about your agency and kind of the history, but also how you think about retaining customers.
Sure thing, Chip. So for those who know me who are here, they'll know that, I tend to be a really straight shooter and I tend to be very transparent too. So that's why I was particularly excited about the topic of client retention, because it's something that we in this past year and a half have really tackled head on. And so I'm happy to share those learnings and whatnot. But for those who don't know me, I've been in the agency world for 12, 13 years, started the company right out of grad school, and I was about 22 years old. So I did a lot of learning along the way. And so Zen Media is my agency. We do predominantly PR and marketing for B2B companies. And, some of our clients include Chase Business, US Navy. We work with a lot of middle market type companies. So that's sort of our jam. And client retention, it's funny because my formative years of building the agency, I spent a lot of time, as I think most agency owners tend to do, on new clients, right? New business. And while that's still always a big part of our operations and our structure and our marketing, I've in the last year and a half really focused it on retention, because otherwise one of the things with agencies that's so challenging is you're constantly in a churn process, especially if you do any type of campaign work. Like, most people just accept that that's par for the course. And like I said, in the last year and a half, we really tried to figure out, okay, well, new clients are great, how can we retain our current clients? And I don't mean just upsell them, but I mean, like, how do we continue to be these sort of strategic partners for our clients? And not that these questions weren't asked before, but I would say we've been asking them of ourselves a lot more strategically since the pandemic, and really thinking about how do we want to make this, a core focus of what we do and how we define success as an agency.
It's super good advice, and you sort of alluded to my next question a little bit, because so many of our lives have changed in the past 15 months, and we're now emerging to some normalcy. Like, I'm down here at our headquarters in Gainesville. I'm actually from Minneapolis, but I'm starting to fly now and go into the office, and we're at a sales meeting this week, and so it's fun to be back in the same room as coworkers, no question. But so when you think about an agency now that's kind of gone through this for the past 15 months, right? And they're now checking all their parts, does everything still work? That's kind of, by the way, why we like the health checkup sort of metaphor for this session is just sort of, hey, how are we doing, after this past 15 months? So from your perspective, why do you think it's a good time to focus on kind of an agency health checkup?
Yeah, just even from a calendar perspective, right? We've passed Q1, Q2, we've got like half of the year under our belt. And so I always think like the summertime is a good time to do just a health checkup and ask sort of these questions. One of the challenges I know I had as an agency owner when I was first starting was to make time to ask these questions, because sometimes you're so in the nitty gritty of things, you don't get to step back. And I think the pandemic for so many of us created that opportunity to step back and think about where we are in our lives, personally, professionally. So I do think this is, we're kind of mid-July, great time to think about what do we want to prioritize for Q3, Q4, and going forward, right? So now you've got like half a year under your belt, you've got some learnings, you kind of hopefully have some forecasting for the next two quarters. And so I think it's just a really good time from the calendar year standpoint to look at, where your agency is.
Yeah, you talked about the sort of the new business focus that most businesses have, and obviously agencies are always having to, if you're doing it well anyway, you're always sort of prospecting. You're thinking about what are some additional customers I can bring on.
Yeah.
But there's also existing customers, right, that you can deepen your relationships with, meet more people, maybe find new projects and new ways to help them.
Yes.
I mean, from your perspective, why else is client retention just such an important part of kind of agency health and wellness?
So, so two things, right? One is your bottom line, because the less like a lifetime, value of a client, if you can maximize that, that's awesome. So there's just a pure like mathematical reason there, like your books will thank you. Two, there's also a qualitative reason there, Chip, which is the stress on a team. Because anytime you bring on a new client, it's a learning curve. You have to learn about them. If you're doing your job well, you really kind of deep dive into it. And then if you don't retain that relationship, what happens is that all that learning sort of goes and you have to start over again. And so I think there's a lot to be said when your team is working with ongoing clients, they've built those relationships, and it's less stress than when your focus is all about getting new clients.
Yeah, it's sort of, if all of your stress is on getting new customers, you're kind of on a hamster wheel, right? You're always trying to keep up, and you don't have any sort of existing business to keep you going.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So I'm just wondering, I mean, we've got, I don't know, 35 minutes, 40 minutes we can chat here, Shama, but and so I was going to ask you, what are the top three things, but it could be the top 10 maybe, right? That an agency needs to focus on to do this well, to optimize their retention rates. And really, I mean, and it's not just about the number, right? I mean, it's really about building strong relationships that sort of foster that retention, I assume.
Yeah. So I'll just riff on this for a bit.
Okay.
I'll just share kind of the way we look at retention, what I think is absolutely key. And then you could feel free if you want to probe on anything, more. I'm happy to delve deeper into it. So I think the biggest thing is responsibility. And what I mean by this is, while retention has always been important for us as an agency, no one really owned it. Right. So it's kind of like retention is everybody's job. Customer support is everybody's job. Marketing is everybody's job. But if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. You get what I'm saying there?
For
Right?
sure. Yeah.
Sales, someone owns that number. For marketing, I mean, look, you're CMO at Sharp Spring. You guys have been growing leaps and bounds, and you got a lot going on. You have certain KPIs, right? That you're hitting, that like you have ownership of certain things. So and this is a great example. It's kind of a tactical part of your bigger picture, but like everyone on your team and everyone on my team, generally we have really good KPIs and responsibilities for here's who's responsible for customer success. Here's who's responsible for marketing. Here's what that looks like. Sales, I think we're always, it's really clear like quotas and numbers and, metrics like that. But I feel like retention is not it's also, there's no KPIs to it, right? It's like, are we retaining customers? Great. Are we not? How do we increase? But it tends to be the sort of nebulous thing where almost every account executive should be retaining their clients, but there's just not a there's not a number to it. So one of the things we started doing was we actually made someone responsible on the team for retention. Like that is one of her metrics that she is judged for, right? Like at the end of the year, we look at and we don't wait till the end of the year, but I think it's so important to say who is going to be responsible for our retention metrics. And then deciding as an agency what that looks like, because it's going to be different. Look, retention looks different for PR agencies to SEO, to paper. Like it's going to look different, right? Especially if you do campaign work, that sort of thing. But you do need to have someone who's responsible for that, because then what happens is they take a more proactive role about what strategies need to get rolled out. So just like you do customer acquisition, for retention, what needs to happen? And this is where I think you have to break it down even further and start to look at, okay, well, if this is our annual retention goal, what needs to happen now on a quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily basis? Right. And so on a quarterly basis, for example, the team decided, even though we're doing all this remote, it's awesome, we really want to go meet one client a quarter. And I think that's great. So we have a budget set aside, we have a whole thing, and the team gets to decide which client do they want to go visit once a quarter. And given clients are different point in their, kind of getting back in the office, if they're meeting with vendors, all this stuff. But all those variables aside, the point is you got to break it down. Retention is very fluffy and you've got to make it more concrete. And the way you do that is you make someone responsible for it. And as a team, you figure out what are we going to do to hit this number? What are we going to do on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis? And then it goes back to, making sure that you're also getting the right clients. And we can talk a little bit more about that. So responsibility is one of the things. The second thing is relevance. What so many people stop after they get a client is marketing to them. So they're like, we've proven our relevance. They're a client, yay. But so much research now even shows us that people will, and this is more for consumer products, but they will Google the thing that they've bought after they've bought it to see if they made a good decision. Right? So like that post-purchase, like, am I, is this sort of—
Did I do the right thing? Yeah.
Yeah. Did I do the right thing? And especially as we have more choices, that increases that sense of like, did I do the right thing? So almost every day you have to think about how can you let your clients feel like they made the right decision, which allows them to double in, right? Then they get to opt in over and over into the relationship, because so many times it's kind of like a marriage. Right? So when my husband married me, and it's not just like a check, like, oh, we're married, great. It's the beginning. So it's like the wedding is the beginning of your marriage. And so, you've got to, you've got to deposit into that relationship. So, he
Two-sided.
knows, yeah, I love eating out. So one of my hobbies tends to be food. So, like, so Friday nights, he'll make reservations at different places that we can try because he knows it's important to me. So just like that, just like a marriage, even with a client relationship, you have to figure out how are you going to continuously invest in the relationship, but not just like, oh yeah, I'm going to pay more attention to my spouse or my client. It's got to be tactical. So my husband's a very smart guy. He talked to the Amex concierge and he said, listen, my wife likes to eat out every Friday night. I want you to have a set reservation for us. Here's what we like, and so it's on the calendar, right? It's something that it is a tactic which he knows will make his wife happy, will make his significant other happy. So I do think even with your clients, thinking about, do you visit them once a quarter? Do you, is it birthdays? Like, and again, who owns that? Now, a good person to own this on your team is someone who also cares deeply about people. And I know this is going to sound silly
So
because
it feels natural to them, right?
yeah, but here's the thing. You can say, doesn't everybody care about people? Yes, and some people are just really good at it. Like they get joy out of it. So the person on our team who's responsible for retention, her favorite thing to do is to make other people happy, right? Like she loves surprising employees with cupcakes and celebrating birthdays. She remembers anniversaries and like all this stuff, which by the way, a lot of this stuff we put in our SharpSpring database. Like we will put the birthdays and notes and all, like you have to, I think, take it from sort of this, again, almost this fluffy notion into tactical things that you are going to do that, almost as a checklist. Now, it doesn't have to be that robotic, but I think it's very important to make sure that you are continuously investing in that relationship, staying relevant to that client, making them feel like they made that right decision. And then this is the other R, recycle, right? So the threes, the three reasons we're talking about: responsibility, relevance slash sort of relationship, and then recycling, which I mean, this is so true too. Your, what is that? The Pareto principle, the 80-20, where
Mm-hmm.
80% of your, happiness, success, whatever is coming from like the 20% that you're, putting in. And so I think that principle really applies in figuring out which clients are no longer a fit. And if you are growing, you have to be honest with yourself because there will be clients that aren't a fit and you're keeping them at the expense that may not show up on the books, but maybe it's a client that's really demanding and the team feels deflated after they talk to them. There is a cost to that sort of cultural drainage, right? And so I think it's very
Sure.
important to revisit your client roster and say, hey, who are the clients that we're not doing a great job of serving because the team's not enjoying working with them? Or is there a client here we've outgrown that we continue to work with because we feel so invested, but really it would free up a lot of mental energy? So I think when
Sure.
it comes to retention, I look at it both from the book's perspective and also from like the team's energy perspective. Because by nature, when you're an agency, no matter what you're doing, you have a strong element of creativity. And that creativity needs to be able to be creative. You have to work, like I feel like agencies have a higher bar because your environment, your culture, and I don't just mean like office and ping pong table, it's got to have that, it's got to be a good energy feel. You've got to, the bar is high because that's how you, like at some jobs you can show up and check in and check out, right? Or like you can have sort of, a mediocre month, whatever. But in an agency where so much of your life is creativity and you are creating constantly, you need that environment.
Wow, there's so much there to dig into. I almost don't know where to start, but I think one of the things that really resonated with me, Shama, was the recycle piece, because probably when we last spoke, we were even talking about the benefit of knowing yourself as an agency, and I think some agencies, maybe especially early on, find themselves doing anything for work, and as they evolve and they sort of hone their services in their niche, if you will, you're just going to know better who's a great fit and the types of customers you want to double down on
Yeah.
versus those that you maybe have to recycle, as you say.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And you're look, when you're starting an agency, it is about like you got to put food on the table, right? You start to you need the cash. But as you mature as an agency, I do think it pays to really know your lane. And I don't mean your lane as in like, you have to force, like you have to stay limited, but I think it does help to figure out who do you serve best. So in our case, we work with so many clients, we work with different industries, but he said, you know what, B2B, we really shine in this space because our team is very senior level too. And it takes, I will say, I think B2B is more challenging than B2C. Like B2C to me, not saying for everybody, but to me, it almost feels like an easier marketing, marketing wise. Whereas B2B, I feel like, well, it's more nuanced. There's more room to be innovative. And so, but that was a decision we made as a team. Who do we really want to focus in on? How do we best serve them? What does that look like? What's sort of our core offering? But I think that recycling thing is so true, Chip, because when we talk about retention, people only talk about hanging on to it. But retention isn't about hanging on to clients. It's about maximizing your team's energy to do your best work. And here's how you know that it's really working. So we actually had a client leave us. So we worked with this client for maybe 4 years. So they were one of our initial clients. So we worked together for 4 years, and then they left, and the team was disappointed because it was a big client for us, right? I will say this, it was sad, and we had to work quite hard to be able to fill that gap and say, and it taught me something about not being overly reliant on one client, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so back then it was a big hit for us. Well, believe it or not, years have gone by. And I think this is where it's important too. But we still nurtured the relationship through our newsletter, right? So this client stayed on our newsletter list.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course, we didn't sever ties, and they left us, by the way. So this wasn't a case where we said, you're no longer a fit. They decided that we were no longer a fit. So, which is always hard, right? Because you always feel like you're doing your best work, and like rejection's never easy. So I don't want to put
No.
that out there to be like, oh, it's no big deal, Yes, it's hard when you lose a client. So then literally years went by, and then the pandemic hit, and this client reached out again and said, I know we haven't talked in years, literally years, and I worked with other agencies, but I've never found what I had with you guys.
Right.
And came back.
So they knew the value and they came back. Yeah.
Sometimes that's a good thing, right? Like sometimes I feel like when we get clients who've never worked with a PR agency before, it's hard because they don't know how good we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's not like a benchmark. And so sometimes it helps when they've worked with other folks and then they can really sort of compare. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides of that. So this client came back during the pandemic. And let me tell you that this client is the team's favorite. Where when he was first a client, our main point of contact, when they first came in, the team was feeling drained. So in retrospect, this is a client we should have let go, but they let go of us. And that's fine. It was just interesting because the team came back and they said, oh my God, is this the same client? Like, what happened here? This client is now so enthusiastic about every idea we present. They trust us so much. And so sometimes it takes a little time in the wilderness, if you will, for someone, and people change and grow and evolve. And so, when I was a newbie to the agency world, I also took it very personally, right? Like when someone wouldn't work with us,
Sure.
And now I just don't, because I'm like,
Understandably,
yeah, because it's like, look, there's things
feels like you, right? They're rejecting you. Yeah.
And but I think here's what's the important part is also when we started, I couldn't fully confidently say that we're the best. We were getting there, but I didn't feel like I knew we were good, but I knew deep down inside we weren't the best. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
As we grew and got better and the team got stronger and I changed as a leader and I learned a lot about myself and how to motivate a team and how to get out of the way. I mean, there was a lot of learning that I had to do, right? As a individual, as a leader. And I feel like when I got to that point, now in my point in my career, I can say we are the best. We're really, really, really good at what we do. And so those are things I can control. I can control who we hire, how we nurture them, the environment we create, what we deliver for our clients. The things I can't control are how a client perceives us, what their own culture looks like, what their own political nuance is, all that stuff I can't control. So I feel like
Sure.
now I just lead a lot more from conviction than I do from like a conversion standpoint. Like I'm not trying to convert anyone. I just know we do really good work. And my goal is to make sure that we are consistently sharing that because I know perception matters too. And
Hmm.
from a retention standpoint, not just with new clients, but our current clients, so they continue to feel like they've made the right decision. So they don't necessarily have to go in the wilderness to figure it out. But if they do,
Right.
that's okay.
Yeah. So whether they stick with you or whether they leave, you've done a great job of kind of reinforcing and telling customer stories and being confident about your own positioning. There like three different things that I heard in there that I could sort of ask follow-up questions to. But one of the things that you mentioned was sort of the B2C versus B2B. And I
Mhm.
think there's a lot there, and there's sort of some new research as well that Forrester just came out with, because I think that their data on the B2B buyer's journey has been updated kind of post-pandemic, and so the
Mhm.
number of touches that a B2B buyer goes through has increased, right? Pretty just in the past year, right?
Yep.
Because I think people are approaching buying differently than they used to,
21
but
touch
also,
from 17. So 17
yeah,
touch points in 2019 to 21 touch points now.
yeah, and so I think maybe even 27. Maybe I read it wrong. It was something significant.
It's jumped.
It's jumped. Nonetheless, it's a lot of touch points, and so I think the sort of the second thing related to that, which I think is really important for agency owners to think about, is the different stakeholders inside of your customers.
Yeah,
And so um, Forrester's data also says that 63% of purchases have more than four people involved versus just 47% in 2017. So more people are involved in the should we buy this thing, should we do business with your agency
yeah.
decision making. And so I think, is that a metric that you track, or is that something you think about? How deep are my relationships? How many people do I know inside of my customer accounts?
Yeah, and it's a really good question too, because here's what also happens, and I'll answer it more from a retention standpoint, right, Chip? Because to attract clients, obviously when you're selling, you've got a, B2B process is different, multiple buyers, that sort of thing. But from
Yeah,
a retention standpoint, I think it's definitely this is something I learned earlier in my career too, is if you only have a relationship with one point of contact, which is your marketing person or your VP or CMO, inevitably when they leave and the new guy comes to town and there's a new sheriff in town, bye bye, right? Like that's because they
yeah,
want their stamp. They want to feel like they have their. And you know what? We've been on the flip side where we worked with a CMO as he's jumped from company to company and he takes us everywhere he goes with him. So I've been on the
sure.
flip side of that too. So I do think you have to strategically create more relationships within the organization. It does take more work, but again, this is one of those tactical things. So, for example, in SharpSpring, we actually have multiple contacts for an account, and we'll add them to our list so we can stay in touch. We'll add them on LinkedIn so we can engage with them, even if they're not our direct point of contact, right? Because we know they influence the not just the buying decision, but the staying power decision. Like who
Yeah,
and this is the other thing which people don't realize in B2B, the biggest difference between B2B sales and B2C sales. In a B2C sale, the thing that a consumer is trying to avoid is regret. You're like, oh, I shouldn't have bought those pair of shoes, right? Or like,
yeah.
this is a bad purchase, or
And
like
now
I
I'm wearing them and they hurt. Yeah.
yeah, like it's a regret. It's a regret. It's
Yeah.
like I want to make sure that I don't regret this purchase. Like that's in your head, that's what you're thinking when you're, deciding whether you want these AirPods or whatever. In a B2B transaction, it is how do you avoid blame? It's not to avoid regret. And I don't mean that like from a perspective of, like the way I know you are, Chip, you take your work as like it is an extension of you, right? So like for you, the way you engage your partners, your vendors, your clients, I know, like, so it's not a matter of like, hey, I don't want to be fired for this sort of thing, but it is a certain responsibility. So it's not a matter of, am I going to regret this software purchase tomorrow? SaaS doesn't work that way. It's, if I get this and we go through this big transition, is my boss going to be like, why didn't we go with XYZ? And why are they saying that? Because they trust that name better. And this was the old
Yeah.
adage of like, people used to say, I don't know if you heard this one, but like, no one ever got fired for buying IBM.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Oh,
So
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
So like because you're safe with Big Blue. And so the
Yeah.
idea was like, doesn't matter how much they suck or they, it's like your boss can be mad at you for going with the most trusted name in the industry, right?
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
part of I think agency challenge is also you've got to be the most trusted name in the agency, which so many agencies have a hard time with because they don't walk their talk. They don't do
Yeah.
for themselves what they're telling their clients to do. And for us, that's been a part of our ethos from day one. I will not tell a client to do something unless we're doing it. So even when we talk about Sharp Spring, the only reason, by the way, I feel comfortable doing this and talking to you about it, Chip, is because we use Sharp Spring, right? Like I don't, I won't shill anything that we don't personally try,
Right.
use, like I've got it. So when we tell our clients and they say, oh, how does it work? We're like, let us show you what we're doing. So I always feel like I'm constantly putting our team through stuff because I test everything on us before we try it on a client, you know? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so,
Well,
but
it's
yeah.
the IBM story. I mean, it's something to think about and sort of admire, right? To have that kind of brand power, right? And so if you're an agency that has the kind of power to build a brand where people are like, I'm glad, I understand why you chose Zen Media,
Mm-hmm.
which is your agency for that because they have a great reputation, and I think you're building that kind of brand,
And it's the only
which,
moat
yeah,
left, Chip. It's the only moat left. Meaning,
yeah,
right? And for those who don't know what a moat is, I'm a history nerd, so I apologize here. But in the old days, when you had a castle, it was surrounded by water and you had a drawbridge that went up and down. It kept invaders out and only people you wanted in. So that was a moat. Today, there's good products and services. They really are, right? Like that's table stakes. That's like price of entry. But really what separates you is brand. And brand is a combination of things. It is your reputation. It is like I was talking to G2 yesterday and they asked me
hmm
about Sharp Spring and I said, it's a good product. It's solid. This is how it helps us, blah, blah, blah. But I said, what I really appreciate is whenever we need something, they're there. Like that's the part that's so key. Right?
yeah,
Like to
personal
us,
touch,
yeah,
yeah,
it's the brand. That is your brand. Because so many platforms out there, when you actually like you can get on, but when you actually need something, you're like, oh my God, I've been waiting like 8 days to get into this one thing that I need done. And that's not Sharp Spring's ethos. That's not, even on your team, like Elise, who's been organizing this. Thanks, Elise. Shout out. Since
shout out
actually
to Elise.
making this happen, you could just see from the amount of effort she puts into anything and prepping this. So for everyone watching, by the way, Chip is just making this look good, but Elise and Chip did so much work on the back end of this thing. And that's the thing, right? Like people don't always get to see all the efforts. Even when an agency looks fancy and they're like, oh wow, these guys are great at retaining their clients, there's a lot of work and strategy that goes into it, right? You
Yeah.
like, so I think that's also
Well,
very important because it's so easy to admire or perhaps even envy other agencies and say, oh, how are they doing this or that? But at the end of the day, if they're good at something, it's because they've got a system in place for it. It's because they're prioritizing it and they're checking all those boxes.
yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, people do business with people, right? And that's why
Yeah.
relationships are so important. So, hey, we did have some questions come in, and I want to make sure that I get to this question from
Sure.
Darius Joseph. I'm just going to read it. So, he says almost 75% of his clients who leave almost always reach back within 24 months. Sometimes they just don't know what they have. That's one of the things we'd like to also work on to figure out how to communicate the value to active clients, and he's wondering how Sharp Spring can help with that. I have an answer for that, but I'd love to hear your answer too.
Yeah, so for us, Chip, we use it, like I said, we actually put our current clients, like we sell to our current clients every day. We don't take it for granted that there are clients, meaning they get our newsletter, they hear when we're in the press. Like we nurture them just like we do our prospects.
Yeah.
We know it's important because every day they wake up and they have people that they're answerable to. They've got a boss. They've got to turn their metrics in. And I think when you can put that sort of empathy into it too and say, hey, how can I help this client succeed with what they're trying to do? And part of that is they've got to make that case to their boss because their boss, like, marketing is one of those funny things where everyone thinks they get it, right? It's like,
Everybody's a marketer. It's so
yeah,
true.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like, I'll role play with you here, Chip. I'm your CMO. I'm coming here. I'm like, hey, Chip, why don't we do some PR? I heard that stuff is great.
Yeah. PR does work. What should we send out?
Hey, man, marketing's your job. I don't know why you're asking me. I'm just giving you ideas.
Exactly. Thanks for the ideas.
That's
They're a
literally
dime a dozen, but
that's
appreciate them.
literally how
Yeah.
so many conversations in
Yeah.
marketing go, right? Like,
Yeah, it's true.
and by the way, Chip and I didn't plan that role play. This is why I like to keep him on his toes here. But
I think I knew what you were going for. But yeah,
but the
absolutely.
reason is like that is the answer you give, right? Like that
Hmm.
because that's the answer everyone I know who works in marketing has, is like, I've got a great idea. And it's like, no, please do tell. And then it's like, well, how would we measure that? What would that look like? It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't that's I'm just giving an idea.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I saw Coca-Cola doing this. We should do it too. It's okay.
Totally.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
As soon as I get
Um,
this budget approved.
exactly. So no, I think that's exactly right. Everybody's a marketer, but it's hard, and I think agency people know it better than anyone, right? Because I mean, it's hard to come up with new ideas that have merit and be able to stand behind them and be able to forecast how they're going to work. And customers are expecting that today. And we haven't talked much about this, but a modern company has moved beyond the old ad firm, probably, that is not at all tied to metrics, right? I mean, they're looking for you to deliver them measurable results. Um, I mean, do you agree with that statement? And how do you think about that at your company?
Yeah. And so, part of this is part of this is just baking it into things, Chip. When what I mean by that is, we can talk about all these things all day long, but unless you make them tactically a part of what you're doing, like Darius's question of like, you've got to you've got to infuse it, right? So it's got to go from sort of these things that we think about and sort of these broad things that we want to happen to actually like someone's got to be responsible for it. Someone's got to have the KPIs to go with it. And then you've got to break it down. Like, what does that look like? What action do we need to do? Because one of the things that I heard years ago, which always just stuck with me, was that love is a verb.
What,
Right?
love is a verb? Yeah, I
Love is
love
a verb,
that. That's
you
so
know?
accurate.
And I feel like client love is a verb. So maybe we should change this title to client love is a verb because it really is. It's like it's not just, and that's why I use that dinner example because I like food and by taking me to dinner, my husband shows like through his actions, right? And it looks
Yeah.
different for everybody. So yeah, I think that, you really have to think about like client love retention is a verb.
I think there might be a whole book there, Shama, that I want to see
I
you write,
will
by the
make a
way.
note of
Make
that.
make it make a note. It's at least a blog post anyway.
Totally.
Hey, our time went super fast here. We're already in 40 minutes, believe it or not. I can't
Wow.
believe it personally. Because you're such a joy to talk to. I'm
Oh,
just
thank
gonna
you.
say that. Yeah.
I'm a
Um,
peach, let me tell you.
well, I think there's a ton of firsthand value there, which is what I love. So, kind of one final question. You know, you know, you can plan ahead, right? When you're bringing on a new customer and be mindful about the questions you ask and how you set up the relationship initially that I think has a bearing on what happens later. I mean, it might be the proposal, the expectations you set, and then also maybe when it ends too. I mean, like both you and Darius Joseph both brought up, hey, the relationship's going to end, maybe, right? And so, what kind of questions do you ask then that keeps you engaged to maybe get another bite at that business later on? So, what questions do you like to ask up front, and other things you like to do up front, and what do you ask at the end?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Chip. And so I will say setting expectations up front is super helpful. Again, here's the thing. You can't control everything what clients do, right? Like I'll just tie Maria's question in so we can get this addressed. And she said, how do
Okay.
you handle clients who go tactical and stop listening after working for many years? And it's the same thing. You got to look at what you can control and what you can't. And you can't make someone listen. You can create, and I know this as a mother of a toddler.
Firsthand, for sure.
Yes.
Yep.
Whose favorite thing to say is "Mama, no, bye." Like that's his favorite sentence.
Yeah.
Um, but what I can do is create a connection with him and ideally inspire him. But I can't control him. So if I can't control a 2-year-old toddler, I certainly can't control what our clients decide to do or don't do. Right. So I do think taking that pressure off that you need to get them to listen, that's that's a tall order. But the things you can do, so one of the things to answer your question, Chip, we have, after many years we did this, but we have a list of 10 things you can expect from us and 10 things we expect from you. And we do this at the onset of a client relationship.
I love that.
One of the things that they can expect from us is the team is ridiculously professional. They're very responsive. I mean, we set up Slack channels to be able to be there for our clients. Like one of the things clients continuously say is, you guys respond so fast to whatever we need. We'll always be respectful. You won't find someone on the team that's not. We will. So we have an ethos we follow. And then we say, here are 10 things we expect from our clients. We expect them to be respectful at all times. We can disagree. People disagree, professionals disagree, but you may never, ever disrespect my team. Like there's certain things we don't stand for. And very few times has that ever happened. Like literally maybe twice in our entire industry, experience. They're not clients anymore. But you also, I think, set that tone for what's okay. And in the future, you can always go back to that and say, by the way, right, this violated this expectation. Or on the flip side, we say, we committed to that and we weren't able to meet that and we apologized for that. So keeping both parties, right, responsible to that document, it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and I think our social team is listening in, and maybe that's a tweetable moment. The 10 things recommendation, Shama. I don't know if you have a blog you've written on that somewhere, but it's a great set of advice.
Yeah.
Got lots of blog ideas for you, Shama.
We'll do another webinar. How about that? We can do another thing about setting client expectations.
I think we have to. I really do, because there's so much here to dig into, and I think it's just a valuable
And then
conversation.
your team can turn it into a blog post, Chip.
Yeah, one of us can do that. So you mentioned Elise, and Elise, our producer, thanks for putting this on. And we're using QR codes. Who knew, by the way, that the pandemic would bring out QR codes as a awesome tool for marketing? And I mean, now it's super commonplace that all restaurants have this for their menu, right? So anybody that doesn't know how to use a QR code, just open up your camera and scan that code there, and it'll take you to the URL where you can learn more about SharpSpring and get a demo. And that if you want a old-fashioned URL, we're certainly going to make sure that you get one as well in a follow-up email. But it's sharpspring.com/health-check. And you can sign up and learn more about SharpSpring with a custom demo, and we'd love to show you the platform. So I'm going to go off script here, Shama, and so I said we'd love to have you back, and we are planning a webinar series for this fall, kicking off in August. And so if you're on here and you're attending and you're enjoying Shama, we'd love to have you back. Stay tuned, and we will tell you more about it coming up soon. Shama, any final words? Thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chip. Look, agency life is live and learn. And I think when you have solid partners and platforms, it makes life easier. I know, like for us, we started to depend on SharpSpring more and more. And I would say the only complaint I have is that I feel like we're not using all the features we do. But one thing at a time, right? I know that my personal style, I can bulldoze my team a little bit if I throw too much from my head onto their plate. So I try to temper that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation, Chip. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, Elise, again backstage. Folks, there's a lot of people that go into making stuff like this happen. So if you appreciate it, definitely let SharpSpring know.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Shama. Thanks again. You have a great day, and everybody else, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye, guys.